But do you not feel that something has to give here, that this has to get resolved somehow, and that the only way to do that is, as with all these situations, you have to eventually compromise in some way? And the problem for Netanyahu is that people think he is completely incapable of offering Hamas any compromise.
Wait for Douglas Murray to completely put Piers Morgan in his place after Piers seems to suggest that it is Israel's fault that this war is still going on.
There is no deal. So the families of the hostages are still there, and hundreds of thousands of protesters in Israel on the street to Tel Aviv right now. They are of the firm belief that it's his own intractable position on this, which is not going to allow any kind of ceasefire to be achievable.
But there again, if I can say so, Piers, it's the same thing, which is the presumption that it's Netanyahu who is uncompromising. We end up with this, again, because Netanyahu is a democratically elected leader, and so it's assumed that some pressure can be brought to bear on him. In my view, it is not Netanyahu who's uncompromising. It's Hamas that's uncompromising. They could have handed back the hostages last October. They could have not done this. I mean, they could have tried to build a state since 2005, when Israel withdrew from the Gaza, and handed the place over to them. Hamas could have used the billions of dollars and pounds and euros that British and European and American taxpayers gave them since 2006. They could have...
I mean, this is so true. They could have had an amazing, thriving economy, an amazing place to live in Gaza, but Hamas completely butchered it. When Israel handed the Gaza Strip over and left them and said, fine, you guys deal with this place now, Israel left them, set them up to be prosperous. They gave them all of these greenhouses where they could grow all these fruits and vegetables and have a thriving economy. What did they do? As soon as Israel left, they just flattened all of those greenhouses and they focused on building tunnels, putting all their money towards destroying Israel and to put their leaders up in, you know, fancy mansions in Qatar and whatnot, rather than actually taking care of their people.
Those billions of dollars to build up Gaza. They could have made a booming, in the good sense of the term, Mediterranean paradise. They could have created wealth for their people. But you know what they did? They built down instead of upwards. They built a tunnel network bigger than the London Underground for all of those years, and they squirreled away the money, just like Yasser Arafat did before them, and they made themselves rich. Why was Ismail Haniyeh worth billions of dollars? Why does Khaled Mashal, why is he worth billions of dollars? Why are their children like princelings who live in apartment complexes in Doha? Because they took the money of Americans and Brits and Europeans and they took it for themselves and kept the people of Gaza in immiseration and poverty. There has been since 2005 a complete counterfactual of what could have happened. But the Hamas leadership didn't want that. They have said themselves they want to use Palestinian children and their lives in order to pressurize the world. These are fanatics. They want the death of their own citizens. In order to get world opinion turned against Israel. Again.
And Douglas isn't a conspiracy theorist. This is true. We had the Hamas leader, who was then later killed by an Israeli drone, say at the beginning of the war, we need to maximize civilian casualties. They wanted as many civilians, innocent civilians in Gaza, to die as possible. Why? Because that makes the Israelis look bad, as it has done. Israel's been under a heck of a lot of pressure because of civilian deaths, right? And they know that that will mean that Israel loses support for its war, they lose the funding, and they lose the support for the international community, and then the hope is that then Hamas can win. They are the ones that want their people dead. Israel, on the other hand, does as much as they possibly can. They are so careful. They put their own soldiers at risk to go in and try and go into houses and tell people, we're going to be striking, you need to move out, right? Because they are the ones who care about civilian lives. On the aid situation, Israel has let in an insane amount of aid, but it's currently sitting, rotting in the sun because the UN will not go and pick up that food. Around 60% of the aid that is being dropped off there is not being picked up by the UN. And then around 90% of the aid that is actually picked up, The trucks of aid, they are looted by Hamas, who won't allow the civilians to have it unless they pay extortionate prices for it. They allow their people to starve. It's not the Israelis that are starving them. Yet Israel gets the blame for everything, and Piers seems to have fallen for that Hamas propaganda, if you ask me.
How do you negotiate with that? The assumption always is in the West today, because we're so sort of fat and lazy in our expectation that peace is the norm, and that historically it's the norm. We're so full of our own expectations and presumptions that we always think that wars end by some kind of compromise and coming around the table, to use the cliche. They don't. Historically, most wars end because one side wins and one side loses. And one of the reasons, in my view, why there is this endless rounds of war in this region is because the Israelis are never allowed to win, and Hamas, in this case, are always allowed to draw. And I think that that is simply to set up the precursor for the next conflict. If Hamas come out of this with a fighting capability, then there will be another round of this war in a couple of years. So when David Lammy and others say what we need to have is a peace deal, I'd say on what terms? Everybody wants peace except for Hamas and the fanatics. Everybody else wants peace. All of these people in the south, these kibbutzniks and the party goers and others who were murdered on the 7th, all dreamed of peace with their Palestinian neighbors and brothers and sisters. Who stopped that peace being possible? Hamas, from 2005 and again to this very day.
There we go. Brilliantly put. Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with Douglas Murray there? Piers Morgan, I think that he is, generally speaking, a great journalist who's often, really good at pressing people and interviewing them. There's been also at the start of the war, he was really good at pressing people, like Jeremy Corbyn, for example. Why won't you call Hamas a terrorist organization? Call them out for who they are. But then gradually, it seems as though he's no longer on Israel's side, and he genuinely believes that Israel are the ones responsible for people starving in Gaza, right? He also thinks that the starvation situation is far worse than it is. I'm not saying nobody is starving in Gaza, but we know that there has been so much propaganda pushed out. For example, we have had this picture everywhere across the news of this frail little child being held by a mother who looks perfectly healthy, by the way. And the reason why that child was so unhealthy was because the child had cerebral palsy. And the various issues that came with that. They had issues with feeding the child as a consequence of that cerebral palsy. But that was paraded around the world, that picture, to show Israel to be evil. Yet, there have been people who have uncovered this is cerebral palsy, and there are many other cases of children where they've got some kind of illness that means that they're sick, and it's being put up as if they're sick and starving, and everyone falls for it. But the people who have questioned that, it's not really gone as viral as the news pieces that are blaming Israel. It's been kept very, very quiet. And sadly, many people have fallen for it. And I don't blame them if they just look at a few news articles. You have to really dig deep to understand what exactly is going on. But it's a shame to see that Piers Morgan hasn't dug deep enough into the facts to figure out exactly what is going on, and to truly understand why it is Hamas's fault that civilians are dying, why it is Hamas's fault that this war is going on. Anyway, that is my timer for my cooker, so I better get my potato. Thank you very much for watching this video. Make sure you press subscribe if you haven't already.